Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Allure of the Poor, sponsored by Dracaena Wines. I'm your host, Lori, WSET Level 2 graduate, UC Davis winemaking graduate, Somm graduate, and champagne specialist. And I don't know, as long as this pandemic keeps going, we might just be adding more stuff to that. Because there's nothing else to do but sit inside and drink wine. So today I have a special guest. I have Katy Wilson of, well, a lot of wines, but we're going to be talking about LaRue today. So welcome, Katy. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
I am honored. It is fantastic. I was doing, when I do these things, I always kind of, I feel like the little troll or whatever, because I've got to find out some information about you. And it's a really interesting. I love hearing the origin stories, and you can read them and you can hear what they do, but it's always more interesting to hear it from the actual person. So my first question always is, what is your origin story? What was the first time you fell in love with wine and you knew that was what you wanted to do?
Yeah, for me, it was a little bit different than most people. I kind of fell in love with wine through the agricultural side of things. So I grew up on a walnut orchard in the Central Valley of California. So I grew up in farming but not in wine at all. My parents didn't even drink wine back then. They do now, but back then they didn't. So when I was in elementary school, high school, I was always working in the orchard, planting trees, pruning, harvest, all of that. And so when I was deciding where to go to college, I decided that I wanted to work in agriculture. So I went to Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo and started with agricultural business as my major. And in Ag Business 101, the professor was talking about different things you could do in the world of agriculture. And when she started talking about wine, I was just like, that's it. I know what I want to do.
Okay, I'm going to pay attention now.
Yeah. And it's funny because at that point, I had, drank a tiny bit of wine. I had an aunt and uncle who are really interested in wine that kind of had shown me a little bit, but I really didn't have a lot of background in wine. But to me, the interest was, first and foremost, wine is agriculture. You're growing the fruit. That's the most important part. And then, but after that, you are creating something completely unique. Like with walnuts, we would grow them and ship them off and never know what happened to them. But with wine, you're taking those grapes and you're creating something that's alive, really. And it not only has agriculture, but a lot of chemistry and creativity, and it's such a social industry. And to me, all of that just fit really well. And I started doing a double major. So I have a degree in wine and viticulture as well as agricultural business.
Well, those two play very much hand in hand. They
yes.
help each other out a lot.
Yeah.
So before we get on, this is a question I had read a long time ago, or somebody told me at one of the wineries that we visited or something, that walnuts are poison. They add they either add toxin to the soil or they pull out nutrients out of the soil. So it's very difficult to plant a vineyard where walnuts used to be. Is that true?
Yeah, so it's the roots. The walnut roots go extremely deep and stay in the soil. So even after you pull a walnut tree out, the root system is so big that it's really hard to pull all of the roots out, and those can interfere with the roots of vines. Don't really care for. It can be kind of the leftover roots of the walnuts can be toxic to the vine. So it's really tough. You have to do extremely deep ripping and really pull out because the walnut roots can go 30 feet deep, and
oh, wow.
It's a lot. So we, when we're replanting, say we have a tree that dies in the orchard, we go in, it is, like I said, it's a small orchard, so we do a lot of the work ourselves. So my dad would go in with a bobcat backhoe and really just dig, and we'd be pulling roots out, and it's crazy. Even after you take a huge pit out, there's so many roots left. So
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. My dog is going crazy. I apologize. I don't know what he's barking at, but he's going crazy. He sounds so vicious. He's probably got his kitty in his mouth and his little nub is going crazy. But I don't know what. I'm in a little room, so he doesn't even see me. I don't know what he's looking at. So that's interesting. So that makes more sense. I was like, what toxins could it really be putting into the soil? But that makes absolutely more sense. So I guess they're spread. It's not like a oak where it's not a tap root that then spreads. It actually is a.
There is a main tap root, but there's also a lot of other roots that spread out as well. So it's pretty intense. Walnuts, very different from almonds, who have very shallow root system and tend to, like, if it's really windy, they can fall over in a really high wind area. So sometimes if you go around and see almond orchards, you might see walnut trees planted in a row as a windbreak around the
Oh, wow.
orchard.
Wow, that's cool. See, look at that. Not just about grapevines today, folks. Not just about grapevines. All right. So when you were at Cal Poly, I read that you did a business plan for that Agricultural Business 101, and so I was just curious, what was your business plan back then, and did you actually stick to your business plan? Or was that like, oh no, that's not, no, this is now.
Yeah, so so it was actually my senior project at Cal Poly. So everybody who graduates from Cal Poly has to do a senior project no matter what major you are. So for me, I decided to write a business plan to start a small winery. And it is actually the business plan that I used to start LaRue Wine. So I started LaRue in 2009. I graduated from Cal Poly in 2005. So I had written that business plan, and then 4 years later, I did rewrite it. It wasn't exactly the same. Actually, the interesting thing is, when I was there at Cal Poly writing the business plan, it was Pinot Noir, but it was from Anderson Valley, which is now, like the property, because it was all about buying property and everything, which I did not end up doing, but the property prices were much lower back then, before a lot of other wineries from Sonoma and Napa started buying vineyards up there. But yeah, so I rewrote the business plan, made it for LaRue, and I was off and running. So.
You always, sometimes you wish I had that idea. I just didn't jump on, like if I only bought that property back then, but
or
then
had somebody who had money since I was 21.
Right, exactly. That's the thing. It's always like, oh, I love this house. Oh, it's just out of my price range. And then like 5 years down the road, you're like, oh, I could have afforded that house now, but now this house is out of my price range.
So true.
Absolutely. So you have worked harvests in quite a few areas, including Napa Valley, obviously, and New Zealand. So, like, what are the similarities and the differences of working a harvest, here or versus New Zealand?
Yeah, it was really fun. So after I graduated from Cal Poly, I did work harvest in the northern and southern hemisphere for a few years. So I worked 2 harvests per year since the seasons are opposite. So I did work in New Zealand and Australia, and I think for me, everywhere I've worked, I try to learn as much as I can, and it is different. It's a totally different culture, although everybody still speaks English, so it's not quite as dramatic as going to France or Italy or somewhere else. But yeah, I think it's just really learning about the regions and the varieties that do well. So I worked at Joseph Phelps in Napa, which was a great experience, some of the best Cabernet in Napa Valley. And I worked at Craigie Range in New Zealand, which was also really amazing. We made a lot of different varieties there. We did Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot, we did Syrah, Merlot. It was really diverse. And in Australia, I worked at Torbreck in the Barossa Valley. So those were working with vines that were over 100 years old, and mainly Syrah, Grenache, Mourvedre. And I think it's just really, to me, it was the experience of not only being in a different area, but also like working with a lot of people from all over the world, because all of those wineries were really great about hiring internationals. So, you might be in New Zealand, but you're working with people from France and Italy and California and New Zealand and Australia. Like, you have people from all over the world, and it's kind of fun because you're, that was in my early 20s, so you're all like really learning a lot and talking about what's different in your country, or some of the people I worked with grew up in wine and have their families have wineries, and so it was a really cool experience just to really try to soak as much in as I could in those couple of years, and just learn about the different varieties and winemaking styles, which was really cool.
So do you just like go to winebusiness.com and go, search New Zealand, and then like, all right.
Yeah, I mean, back then it was, but now it's probably a little bit easier with social media and everything to like just make connections. Back then it was kind of your first few jobs. Yeah, I found through wine business or winejobs.com, and but after that you kind of get on like people refer you, so like there were a lot of people who kind of worked at Joseph Phelps who also worked at Craigie Range later, and so it's kind of like a lot of people connection, refer back and forth, and I still do that to this day, like refer people back and forth to different areas. I mean, right now it's harder with not being able to travel and have people international, but yeah, no, as soon as things open up back again, we can have interns from other parts of the world.
Yeah, and I find that really amazing. I've never been to New Zealand. It's like my bucket list, but I would
need to go.
Yeah. We keep saying we're going to go, but I don't want to go until I can spend a large portion of time there, because it's just so long to get there. But I totally would love to work a harvest there. Like just see how it's different than what we do here. It's really, just, same thing, but it's a different approach type, so kind of cool. Yeah. And did you actually, you hear stories of, I had no money, I just went and, I lived in a van and things like that, or were you a bit higher on that? Did you have an actual place to stay?
Well, luckily the places that I worked were great about having housing for the interns. So both in Australia and New Zealand, both of those wineries had intern houses, which was great. So you're living with all the people that you're working with. But I did travel before in New Zealand. I traveled before harvest and with a friend of mine, and we had a car we rented and drove all over the northern and southern islands, and we definitely slept in the car quite a few times. We were eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches so that we could buy $40 or $50 bottles of wine.
That's awesome. That's awesome. See, it's all priorities. It's all priorities. Totally. That's fantastic. So let's talk about LaRue. So what's the story behind the name, and how did we get to having your own winery?
Yeah, so LaRue is named after my great-grandmother. Her name was Fiona LaRue, and she was someone who always told me I could do whatever I wanted in life. So when I was deciding what to call my wine, I decided to name it after her. She was still alive when I named the wine. She lived to be 98 years old.
Oh, wow.
So I knew her very well. She did pass away before she ever got to try the wine, but she knew it was being named after her, so it was really special.
That's wonderful.
But, yeah, she was amazing. So I had been working at Flowers Winery on the Sonoma coast. So I was the assistant winemaker there for a few years, and that's really when I really got to know the really coastal area of the Sonoma coast. The vineyards that I work with now are all within 5 to 10 miles of the ocean. They have a really huge amount of that ocean influence and really beautiful acidity and aromatics, and just really great sites. So I was working at Flowers when I got to know that area really well. Flowers works with vineyards all over Sonoma County, but they have a lot of vineyards in that coastal area. So I had been working there for a few years, and decided that I needed to challenge myself to do something different. So I started working at Cayman Wines in the town of Sonoma, and making Cabernet and Syrah, working with consultant winemaker Mark Harold. So it's really big, massive cabs with like 80% new oak and really big style. So kind of the opposite of how I make my wine, but I wanted to work with someone who did that style and was very good at it, and really understand why, why do you choose to do it this way, and kind of learn from him. So I had started working at Cayman in 2009, and when I got hired there, Robert came and said to me, hey, if you want to make your own wine here, you can. That's part of your job offer. You can make some of your own wine in my winery. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty amazing, but I don't think I'm ready to make my own wine yet. And so right after that, another friend came to me and had fruit from these from some vineyards that I knew. I had worked with these vineyards when I was at Flowers Winery, and he's like, hey, I have extra fruit that I used to share with Flowers, and it doesn't make sense for me to do that anymore. I could share these vineyards with you, and it could be long term. I think you should start your own wine. I was like, okay, well that's interesting, and I have a place to make the wine. I have some amazing vineyards of Pinot Noir that I love, and I have a business plan that I had written. So I rewrote the business plan. I started talking to people about investing, and everybody I spoke with wanted 50% or 51%. And the thing about LaRue is the business plan was always to be small. Like, my plan was to make 500 cases. It was not to grow and grow and grow. It was a small winery. So it just didn't make sense to give up that much ownership. And so I had kind of given up at that point. And that's when another friend from Napa, a winemaker from Napa, came to me and said, hey, somebody did something like this for me once before. I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to loan you the money, and you can pay me back when you can. And I don't want any ownership in your winery. And if I could give you any advice, it's to not give up ownership. And so I was off and running, and took his advice to heart. And I have since paid him back, and I do still own LaRue 100%. So it was kind of just jumped.
It was like everything was coming at you from all angles, telling you, it was like, no. Eventually you have to listen, right? Eventually you're like, oh, maybe this is really a sign that I should be doing this. And I think that's something that I love so much about the wine world is they're inherently good people.
There's a lot of camaraderie.
Yeah, there's so much of pay it forward, like that. You hear that all the time. Like, somebody did this for me, and now I'm going to do this for you. And that's a wonderful thing about the wine world, the wine industry, is even though it's a competitive world, within it's not what can I do to help you? I've been there. I know what you're doing. I can help you out, And it's a wonderful thing. So why Pinot and Chard?
So for me, I think Pinot Noir is one of the most difficult varieties to make. It's very tricky. It's difficult to grow. It's difficult to make into beautiful wine. And I've always loved a challenge. So there's that aspect of it, but also the area. So like I mentioned, all my vineyards are very coastal. They're kind of in this little pocket of the Sonoma coast near Sebastopol and Occidental that are make such beautiful, elegant wines. And so that was also part of it, is like that really special area of the Sonoma coast. And I started with just Pinot Noir. So I knew I wanted to make Chardonnay, but I started with only Pinot Noir, so until 2014. So from 2009 to 2014, it was just Pinot. And then in 2014, I was able to get some fruit from the Charles Heinz vineyard, which is out in Occidental. And it's a more well-known vineyard. Charlie sells a lot of his fruit to a lot of really well-known wineries, and people make beautiful wines from there. And I had worked with him at Flowers, and I always wanted to work with his fruit. So it took me 5 years, but I have my own row of Heinz. So And yeah, so I get about a ton and a half from there every year. And then in 2017 was the first vintage of a vineyard that I actually worked with the owners on planting. So the Klopps, who are really great farmers in Sonoma County, Ted Klopp and his daughter Lauren Klopp Williams, we worked together on planting the H. Klopp vineyard, and it's 8 acres of Chardonnay. We worked together on choosing the clones, and it's a beautiful site, and that wine it's already at the 2017 vintage, which was our first, is already just so complex and so beautiful. And I think those are young vines, so it's only going to get better and better. So it's really exciting.
I feel the pain of it took you 5 years. So we have, we want Brecken Cab Franc. And so we every year we joke with Damien every year. In fact, we did it last week. We were sitting there before the shutdown. We were there actually the day before the shutdown. We're sitting there, and Damien's sitting with us. We're like, Damien, it's that time of year. So can we get Cab Franc this year? And he's like, not this year. He actually had to replant some vines, so he actually is lower for himself this year. But we've been asking. Our first vintage was 2013. So we've been asking since 2013. So you're ahead of the game. We've been going longer than 5 years. But we joke every time we see it, we're like, we're just going to keep asking because you just keep saying not this year. So to us, that means there's potential for next year.
Don't give up.
You have to keep asking. So I get it. And when you fall in love with an area or you fall in love with a site, you just got to go, So 5 years, that's not too bad.
Totally.
I'm hoping to make it within single digits that we finally get through. But with him replanting again, I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're going to be hit in double digits before we have potential. So in addition to LaRue being the winemaker, you're a consultant winemaker for several wineries.
Yes.
What's your balancing act between your own wine, holding your own winery, and then being a consultant for these other wines? How does that work, being a consultant for so many different wineries?
Yeah, it is always a lot of work. There's always something to do. You always have a list going. But yeah, it is. I think over time, for me especially, I've figured out how to balance everything, make sure nothing slips through the cracks. So I actually when I started LaRue, I was working at Cayman, and I actually stayed there till 2014. So I was there for 5 years. And in 2012, I started consulting. So for 2 years, I was doing LaRue, working as a consultant for 2 wineries, and working full-time at Cayman. So that was pretty intense. I wouldn't recommend it, but I just didn't take days off, But so I left Cayman in 2014 and started working just being completely self-employed. So I have LaRue, and then I work as a consultant for several other wineries. And it is just building a lot of spreadsheets, and as far as keeping track of everything and making sure you're not missing anything as far, vineyard checks and bottling. And it's definitely a balancing act. And I'm involved in various levels at the different wineries. So it's as far as events and such go. So, but for winemaking, I'm very much involved in everything from the vineyard all the way to the bottle in every winery. I've been able to set up to where most of my wineries are made out of the same location, which is really great.
Okay,
so
that's helpful.
Yes, yeah. So Annaba Wines in the town of Sonoma. We just built a winery just a few years ago. We finished building it. So we have this beautiful winery that I helped to design, and so that's where most of my clients are, as well as LaRue. I make LaRue at our winery there. And then just a few miles away on 8th Street East in Sonoma, I have one of my wineries. We work out of the Obsidian is the name of the custom crush that we do there. So it's a really great that in that way that I don't have to drive all over the place to different wineries. There was a period of time where I was driving from Sonoma to Windsor to Santa Rosa all over. And then it's vineyards. So I have about 50 different vineyards all over Sonoma County and Mendocino County, and some in Santa Lucia Highlands, but for the most part, Sonoma and Mendocino. And it's just a matter of, if you plan everything right, you can visit 10 vineyards in a day. It's just making sure you make a plan and you're efficient with your time.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
And I guess it's helpful that they are. It's got to be very beneficial that they're all in the same area. I mean, if you were going, like going up to Clarksburg for me, up to Clarksburg, I guess it's down for you, right? Down to Clarksburg, down to Santa Lucia, then go over to Sonoma, Napa, that, you're spending more time in your vehicle than really doing anything else.
And it's also making a good use of your time in your vehicle too, because I do drive a lot, but I always have a lot of phone calls to make, so I definitely spend a lot of time talking on the phone while I'm driving.
Hands-free, of course.
Yeah.
Hands-free.
Yeah, with my Bluetooth. Yes.
So when you're making these wines for all of these other wineries, I should say, is it kind of like finally a kid in a candy shop when you get to work on LaRue? Like, 'cause, I mean, you put your personality into those wines, but you're following somebody else's concept, I guess. But when it comes to LaRue, it's all you. So is that like, you're like, yay, I get to do LaRue today?
A little bit, but I think that, people hire me because they like my style. So I don't stray very far from my style. Obviously, with anybody's style of winemaking, there's variation. So I think for me, it's so I'm mostly well known for making Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, but I do make 20 different varieties for my clients. So I'm making everything from Cabernet and Merlot, Sauvignon Blanc, Cab Franc. I'm making Syrah, Grenache, Mourvedre, Viognier, Grenache Blanc, Vermentino, Sangiovese. So it's really fun in that aspect for me to make wines for other people, because I'm able to explore doing different things, making carbonic style wines or late harvest Viognier or port style wine. It's really just kind of like the sky's the limits with all of my clients. But then when I look at LaRue, it's like, this is a little piece of the little pocket of the Sonoma coast that really where my heart is, and it's where I can express me. And it is only Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, so it's just more specific, I think. And yeah, I do feel I feel like I put as much passion into my clients as my wines. That's just how I am. It's just not my style to be like, oh, I care more about this than I do about other people's wines. But I think it's more just, it's fun to have that diversity. And with my clients, it's definitely, you're talking about what they're looking for and what, maybe some variation on my style as far as maybe the amount of whole cluster in the fermentation, or maybe a little small change of the percentage of new oak versus like if it was my wine, what I would do, So there's little changes, but as far as like fermentation style, I don't change very much for my clients. I'm always wanting the vineyards to speak for themselves, and that's what my clients want as well. And I don't add nutrients and a lot of things during my fermentations. I like to keep everything fairly, for lack of the better word, natural as far as that goes. But definitely, it's more of like a collaboration, which I think is exciting to have that.
And so for LaRue, you mentioned that you're sourcing everything. So is there any future in that business plan of having your own estate at some point?
Yeah, that would be the dream, definitely, to have a small, like 3-acre vineyard. But it's one of those things that may take some time. But I'm really lucky that I work really closely with my vineyards, and I've been working with the same vineyards from the beginning. So Rice Bivac and Emmeline Ann Vineyard are 2 vineyards I've had since I started LaRue in 2009. And then I have the 2 Chardonnay vineyards that, as we already chatted about, I got acquired later on. And then my other Pinot Noir vineyard is Thorn Ridge, which is farmed and owned by the Klopp. So it's the same vineyard as the Chardonnay. So we work really closely together. Having planted the Chardonnay vineyard together, we're definitely, all my relationships are really long-term ones, which I think is very, very good when you don't own your own winery or your own vineyard. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Right. Right. And then, you can't have a conversation this year about this vintage without the fires.
Yes.
So Pinot being so finicky, how did that correlate to the smoke and your 2020 vintage?
Yeah, unfortunately, we were kind of the winds were blowing directly south for that first few days for a while of the fires in August. And we tested one of our vineyards just 3 or 4 days after the fires started, and because we were planning to pick it like just 4 days after that. And at that very beginning, this is like the Friday after the fires started, the labs were not yet backed up. Like they eventually got back, like within days, they got backed up to where you weren't able to get results for weeks, and then months. So we were able to get a sample in like on one of those very first days, which we got the results back in 2 days, which was amazing. Incredible. To have that in there. Yeah. And even after just 3 or 4 days in the smoke, it already came back with high levels of guaiacol. So we were not able to pick. Wasn't able to pick any of my Pinot Noir. We did pick a small amount of Chardonnay right after the fires started, and I'm still evaluating what we're going to do with that. But it was really heartbreaking. It's really tough. For myself and for my clients, for myself, like I said, I didn't pick any Pinot Noir. And for my clients, we picked barely anything. And it's really, just really a tough year for everyone. And hopefully we're not going to have something like that happen again as early as it did. We had, having it happen in August, I'd picked some sparkling wine for Reeve Wines. So we had already had the sparkling wine in, and that was it. I hadn't picked anything else. Everything else was, a week or two out from being ready. So it was really, really tough. Then in the previous fires, I've been done picking. So like most of my varieties come in early, and so I've not had to deal with having having basically your entire vintage in the smoke. So we have a lot to learn still, and right now it's a lot of research and trying to figure out what to do in the future. And like I said, I hope we don't have such a terrible season again. Yeah.
Right. We lost our Cab Franc also. And we're in Paso. We did a couple of tests at the beginning, and it was okay. And then we were like, all right, let's do one final one, and it just came back high. And like you, so small. We can't afford to. I mean, once you pick, it's a domino effect of everything else you have to do.
The costs just keep going up and up and up. Yeah.
Right. So we had to forfeit our Cab Franc this year too. Yeah. They talk about the thickness of the skin and whether it's and like you said, I think we just need more research because I don't think they know yet. Is it the thickness of the skin? Is it somewhere along the line? Did you hear 9 days in smoke? Did you hear that?
Oh no, I didn't hear that. Yeah.
Somebody started saying, "Oh, well, they determined it's 9 days in smoke," and I'm like, "Well, how do you know that? Because is it a lot of smoke? Is it a little smoke? Like that would determine the day. So that doesn't make sense to me."
Yeah, well, no, a lot of it too is I did a few seminars with Dr. Wolherster from UC Davis, and one of the big things she was talking about is the freshness of the smoke. So you could be 50 miles away, but if the wind is blowing in your direction and your smoke is less than 24 hours old, the amount of phenols in the smoke itself is much higher and you're more at risk. So
Right.
it's yeah, like you said, there's so much research
So
to
many
be done.
variables.
Yeah.
So many variables, and that's actually I mean, we had the wind carrying because we didn't really have a fire near us in El Paso, so it was the wind. But and then they talk about and the other thing, we were tasting the fruit, and it was tasting fantastic. Like, yeah. Then, you do that micro ferment, and you're like, like, wah, wah.
It's like, this does not taste good.
Yeah.
Well, I get a lot of people asking me, too, like, oh, is it just like smoky, like a barrel toast smoke? And, like, I like to make it clear to people that if it is bad smoke taint, it can taste like burnt hair or cigarette butts, and it definitely has this retro-nasal aspect to it that just is like really unpleasant. And I think for Pinot Noir, I think it's such a delicate grape. There's not a huge amount of tannin in it naturally, so there's less to kind of stand up to and cover that
fight it off
and bitterness. And just like it's definitely tough. It's really not. Pinot does not like smoke at all.
Pinot doesn't like a lot of stuff, so it's always wonderful when you can craft this beautiful art in a glass or in a bottle, to make this beautiful wine. So I think it's a perfect time to talk about your Pinot. So this is what I have. Okay, so this is LaRue Pinot Noir from the Sonoma coast. So can you tell us about the wine itself?
Yeah, so this is a 2018. So this is the wine we just released to the Wine Club in the fall release. It's not yet out in distribution. So I thought I'd give you something special. So I thought it would be nice to show the Sonoma Coast because it is a Sonoma Coast blend, but it's very much unlike a lot of Sonoma Coast blends you may have. We actually just in this vintage started putting the percentages of the vineyards on the back label to kind of differentiate that it's not just a blend of 20 different vineyards. This is actually a barrel selection of barrels that I feel are a little bit more fruit forward. This wine is meant to drink a little bit younger than the single vineyard wines, but it is made up of all the single vineyard wines. So you have, this one is 46% Thornridge Vineyard, 38% Rice Spivak, and 16% Emmeline Anne. So all really great vineyards, all in that little pocket of the coast that I was talking about. I really love the 2018 vintage because it is so expressive. I think it has
it is vibrant.
Yeah, and I think that even the single vineyard wines who normally take a little bit longer to open up, those are already tasting so great right now as well. So I age all of my Pinots for 20 months in barrel. So that's why this is just being released because it was just bottled in May. So bottled in May, released in the fall. I like to age for that amount of time because I really feel that the oak integrates very well and there's a lot of texture and mid-palate mouthfeel that comes through by that extended time in barrel and on leaves. So
I think that Pinot Noir is one of the varieties that really loves oak, and it doesn't, it has like a symbiotic relationship with it, where we have so many varieties that love oak, but the oak takes over, and I think that Pinot loves oak, but it becomes a symbiotic relationship with it, and it's so delicate and so it just adds a layer of complexity to it versus saying here's oak.
Yeah.
Now, do you have how many? What you said you had your barrel protocol, but do we have different cooperages, different toasts, and now we're sampling all these different barrels, and then we're going to compose this blend? How do we?
Yeah, so I pick I pick all the vineyards at different times, and I keep all the clones at each vineyard separate. So I have separate fermentations, and so as I'm aging, the barrels are all separated. So you will have the Swan clone from Rice Spivak and the 115 clone from Rice Spivak and then the 115 clone from Emmeline. All the barrels are separated, and I actually leave them as individual barrels through their aging. So when I'm tasting, and this is part of being really small, only having 20 barrels, I can taste through all my 20 barrels, and maybe one barrel is ready to be racked, but none of the others are. So I can do a barrel-to-barrel racking. So that really allows the wines to become very different over time. So, as for example, right now, my 2019s, I still have a few barrels that are on original lees. So that means I fermented, pressed, went to barrel, and the only thing that's happened to them since then is they're being topped. So they have all the original lees that have been settling out over time, and I really feel like it really changes the complexity of the wine. Some of them where the leaves start to get a little stinky or funky, and you want to get the wine off of that, and you don't want that to happen. You don't want that to impart into your wine. So
right.
That's why some of them have been racked and some haven't. So in the next month or so, for the 2019 vintage, I'll be going through and tasting and making my blends, and I'll rack those up to tank and back down to barrel, and then bottle in May. So it's about 15 months is where I make my blends, 15, 16 months, and then 20 months is when I bottle. And that really, I think, having that, it's amazing how different all the barrels taste over that amount of time. Yeah.
It's incredible. It's, you know, it could be the same cooperage, the same toast, sitting right next to each other in the barrel room, and you taste them and you're like, those are completely different wines.
Totally.
This is really beautiful. First of all, I always hate doing this because it's never bright enough to really see, but the color is magnificent. Like,
thank you.
This is it actually reminds me, this is going to be so weird, but it actually reminds me, there is a photo that everybody uses because it's one of those like pexels or, you know, things that you can take for free, you know, copyright free.
Yeah.
And it's the picture of a wine glass like this, and it's very obviously a Pinot Noir by the color in that picture. And that's what this is. Like, this is so beautiful. It could be that that picture that everybody sends out of their wine glass, because it is quintessential Pinot right here. You know, it is beautiful. It's got this lovely, you know, color plus the translucent edges. And while you were talking, I just kept smelling because it's so beautiful. And it's so light. What is the alcohol on here?
The alcohol on this one is 13.3.
13.3. So I was going to say it's very low in alcohol, which could put you in trouble because you're just going to keep drinking.
It's easy to drink a bottle. I definitely, on most years, I do have low alcohol wine, sometimes even in the 12% range or 12.5% range. But, you know, it's vintage to vintage dependent. So if it's a warmer vintage and it gets a little riper, my alcohols will maybe be a little bit higher, but mostly under 14. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, technically you're a cool climate.
Yeah.
You're a cool climate, so...
and that's the beautiful thing about this area is that we get so much fog, but we do get sunshine in the middle of the day, but it really is enough fog and cool nights to really slow that ripening down, so you can have a beautifully complex wine at a low alcohol, which that's my favorite thing, you know.
Right, absolutely. So to go a little geeky, and we'll get to Chardonnay in a second, but to go a little geeky, when you're looking to harvest your Pinot for this, like you're saying, you're harvesting these different vineyards at different sites, are you looking for the same thing in each vineyard? So like, what are the tech specs that you're looking for that you're like, okay, this is the perfect time to pick the Pinot for me?
Yeah, you know, it's a lot to do with flavor, and every vineyard does have a little bit of a different flavor profile, but I'm definitely looking to see, I do all of my sampling myself during harvest time, so I'll go and grab a sample of a vineyard, so maybe I'm sampling 30 clusters in a block, and tasting as I'm walking and looking and seeing what everything's looking like. But then I'm taking those samples back to the winery, crushing them up, I am checking the pH and the Brix just to have those numbers and know what's going on. But the biggest part is tasting. So I'm looking for, over time it's something that's like, oh yeah, you can just tell when it's ready. It's like intuition. But it's like you get to the point where it's like you're sampling and something maybe tastes still grassy and straw-like, has those green notes, and then it starts tasting like strawberry, and then it moves to cherry, and it's kind of, for Pinot Noir, you want to kind of pick it before it's really, when you're doing a sample, if it's already like a lot of cherry flavor, a lot of fruit, you're maybe too late, because Pinot ripens so quickly that if you're sampling and you're getting those strawberry notes, and you're planning to pick like 2 days later, well, you're going to be there in 2 days. A lot of it is looking at the weather, though, too, because it's like you might think that something's going to happen at a certain time, and then all of a sudden you have a week of being socked in fog and ripening isn't going on. So it is definitely a balancing act, and sometimes visiting vineyards multiple days in a row and pulling samples, and a lot of coordination with the farmers on picking, because there's a lot of prep in even just getting the pick scheduled and bins out and nets off and all that sort of stuff.
So you brought a question up. So you're talking about strawberry to cherry. So that is, we know it's the compounds that make it up, but is that a direct relationship to ripeness? So are Pinots that are strawberry at a different ripeness than Pinots that are at cherry?
Like after it's already like a finished wine, or are you saying like as it's grape? But
as it's grape.
Yeah, I do think so. I think that when you're getting, when I think about strawberry too, I think about strawberry still has some of those grassy, not necessarily grassy, but more like straw, like it has more of an earthiness than like a ripe cherry. A ripe cherry to me is like all fruit, whereas like a strawberry kind of does still have a little bit more, has more of those green earthy notes. So it's kind of, and maybe my interpretation of those descriptors are, it's my palate versus like, sometimes words and taste don't always match.
Right.
But yeah, I think for me, it's like looking at it as like, once you're like only getting a lot of fruit, that is much riper than something that has other things going on, still maybe has a little tiny bit of green note in it as far as a grape sample goes. And then once, after you get to the point where you're sampling and it's all fruit, then you're going to go to the area where it's like jammy and you're getting like stewed or jammed fruit, or, like very ripe fruit. And a lot of people pick up that level, and that's totally just a stylistic difference.
Right.
So for me to make these sorts of wines that have a lot of those other characters going on that aren't just ripe fruit, I pick at
you pick a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
Pick a little bit earlier.
It's nothing right or wrong. It's just a different style.
Sure, it's your style. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I say kudos to your style, because I think that one of the things I actually never tell people what they're tasting, because similar to what you said, it's your palate.
Yeah.
One of the funniest things about Pinot to me, and this is really a personal story, when I first got into wine, I never liked Pinot. Like it was no. And we would go to a tasting room and they're like, oh, we have this lovely Pinot for you. And no. And then I started getting wiser. I'm like, why am I saying no? I can taste it and learn from it or whatever. And as strange as this sounds, I'm deathly allergic to strawberries.
Oh.
Okay. So I cannot tell you what a strawberry really tastes like. Right?
Yeah.
So previously, every time I tasted a Pinot that was strong in strawberry, my comment was, it's weird. I don't know what this is. Like, what is this? And I couldn't appreciate what it was because I was so blown away by, I have no idea what this is. This is just weird,
Yeah.
And, as I moved up in my education and developing my palate, I started to listen to other people. And every time they would describe strawberry, I would go, oh, that's that weird thing, and it's not that the wine is weird, it just, I couldn't describe it. And once my brain was able to correlate that weird taste is strawberry, I really started to fall in love with Pinot. Because
awesome.
now I'm like, okay, it's no longer, now I can determine, I no longer say weird in my brain. My brain says strawberry. But it's always been something that's like weird to me, like I was like, oh, that's why,
Yeah,
but now I love it.
Funny.
Yeah, now I love Pinot, but I fall under I actually do like strawberry, but to the cherry. I like those, and that's what this is. This is a very if I'm envisioning the vineyard, you're picking these clusters, and they're at very different, not massive differently, but different Brix levels and different ripening levels, and they're adding such a complexity as the wine is being made. It's not, here's all cherry, or here's all strawberry, or here, as you taste it, you're getting different levels of complexity in that wine. It's beautiful. It really is. So you have different vineyards on here. Like you said, is your Sonoma coast always a combination of all of these vineyards, or in different percentages, or?
Yeah, there has been a few years where we've had extremely low yields at the Emmeline Ann vineyard. So in the 15 and 16 vintages, there was no Emmeline Ann in the wine.
Okay.
But normally, yes, the three vineyards go into the Sonoma coast in different percentages, though. Depends on the year.
And then do you also offer each of those vineyards independently?
Yes, yeah. So I also make a single vineyard wine from all three of those vineyards as well. Yeah, and then we also have the two Chardonnays, so it's kind of a nice mix.
So what is your profile for Chardonnay? What do you look for in your Chardonnays?
So for my Chardonnay, I've always wanted to be in this kind of coastal area, which has a different flavor profile than more inland with more rich clay soils. So all the soils in our area are gold-rich sandy loam, and of course we get a lot of the fog. So I'm able to make Chardonnays that have a lot of minerality, a lot of citrus, and really acid-driven. So they have the same complexities that the Pinot has, because they're in that same area with getting a lot of fog. But I'm not making a big buttery Chardonnay by any means. So depending on the year, they may go all the way through or partway through malolactic fermentation. But it also, depends. Just depends on what's going on. But and aged in once used French oak barrels for 16 months. So I'm going to be bottling my Chardonnay next month for the 2019 vintage. So they do stay in barrel for quite a long time. Again, the same philosophy as far as leaving it on original leaves and really building that mid-palate texture and the integration of the oak that is there. So with the Chardonnay, similar to the Pinot, it's like the oak is meant to just uplift the wine and not overpower it.
Wonderful, wonderful. And then what, does LaRue have a tasting room?
Yeah, so we do tasting by appointment when we're open again. Right now we're in shutdown, but we do tastings at the Emmeline Ann Vineyard. So it's a really beautiful site of just 3 acres, just about 10 minutes west of Sebastopol. So it's not that hard to get to. They're always by appointment and always private, so it's kind of suited for COVID time. But we also just put up a gazebo with a heater and everything, so it's a really great spot now. We're ready for the winter, and then we got shut down. But yeah, things will come back. And so yeah, we're my husband and I he started working with LaRue full time this past month. So he's hosting most of the tastings and that sort of thing. So it's really a great setup. And Wayne and Nancy Honeycutt are the owners of Emmeline Ann Vineyard. They live on the property, and they're just the sweetest people, letting us host all of our tastings there. And they're so generous and great.
So, but we do our tastings in the vineyard too, and
nice.
Paso, 105 degrees. I'm at, they pull up, and I'm like, listen, it's like 100 degrees.
Yeah.
Sure you don't want to taste at the winery? No. We want to see the vineyard. Okay. So I actually started giving them. I bought these umbrellas that are they're like silver to like get rid of the
reflect
sun,
the heat.
So they're walking around. I give it to them, and I'm walking around like the sweat is coming down on me. But that's not. We don't have a gazebo. I'm going to have to talk to Mike.
Yeah, totally.
I'm sure the owner Joe, where we get our cab from where we do it, I'm sure he wouldn't mind us doing that. Might steal your idea of a gazebo.
Yeah, totally.
So we're almost we're actually almost at an hour. So I have like two more questions for you. One, wine sometimes has that like good old boys adage, and I'm so thrilled to see more and more female winemakers going on. But you're not only female in a male, kind of world, but you're Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I just hear you. Yeah.
I froze. Yeah. Okay. So, you're not only a female in the good old boys gang, but you're young. So, did you have hurdles that you think you had to, clear because of that almost double whammy?
Yeah, I still constantly get people being like, "Are you old enough to be making wine?" I'm 38 now. But yeah, I think that it definitely was very difficult, and hopefully is getting better. There's still times where I'm like, you just get crushed and down, and you're like, oh, why am I still dealing with these, preconceived notions about what I should or shouldn't be doing, or, people treating you badly because you're a woman. But I think that I'm hopeful that we can make more and more movements over time and have more women in the industry in the high, in the levels of winemaker and consulting winemaker, not just, assistant winemakers and enologists, that are more commonly you find women. And women in the cellar too. Like I don't see very many women working in the cellar. It's mostly men too. So
females can't drive forklifts.
I've been told that before. But for me, I was really lucky that growing up, I have two sisters. My dad, and growing up on a walnut orchard, my dad definitely treated us like he treated us like didn't treat us any differently than if he had boys. Right. And he said to us, always said to us, you can do anything any guy can do. And he would, I learned how to weld when I was 12. I learned how to drive a tractor at a young age. I was driving quads at 5 years old. And I think if I didn't have that foundation, I probably would have been defeated early on and probably wouldn't be where I am now, because I had the confidence to be like, oh, I do know how to drive a forklift, thank you very much, and I'm going to show you. Versus like if you don't have that background and you're the 22-year-old girl next to the 22-year-old guy who also doesn't know how to drive a forklift, say, coming into it, you didn't have that experience, you get defeated much more quickly because nobody wants to teach you, and they think you're going to wreck something or whatever.
Right.
And it's really, really a bummer that that's still the case. But, we're working every day. You just kind of have to make a little bit more of a difference and try to be the example for, I hope that there are women out there who see me and they're like, oh, I could do that. I could be a winemaker, own my own winery, be a consultant, and not get defeated.
Okay. Excellent. I love it. So where can people find LaRue? on the socials, and how do they get themselves some of this amazing Pinot?
Yeah. So LaRueWines.com, LARUE, and that's where you can find. We do have a few wines that are available for sale on the website, but we also have a wine club that 2 shipments per year, either 3, 6, or 12 bottles per shipment. So that's also on the website. Check it out. And we do Instagram and Facebook. We are LaRue Wines, so pretty easy to find us. Yeah. But yeah, we do, and like I said, we do tastings by appointment at the Emmeline Ann Vineyard, and info about that is on the website as well.
Okay. And currently, nobody's doing tastings, but as soon as we open up, they can schedule on LaRueWines.com. So
when we're back open.
When we are back open, which hopefully is soon.
I know. Yeah, we hope so.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Katy, for coming on and for sharing this beautiful Pinot with me. And when we do kind of open up, and I do actually make a drive up there, I keep saying, I'm going to drive up there. I'm going to see this gazebo. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure to meet you, and your wine really is beautiful. It's elegant, it's soft, and it's complex in such an elegant way. It really is. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Well, you have a great day. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Stay safe,
as well.
Stay warm, stay cool, stay whatever. Have a great day. Happy holidays.
Bye.
Bye.